Hi, I'm Ed Painter. Welcome to my home in Cohutta, Georgia. You're watching the Painter series on Delay and Block Productions.
Welcome back to the Painter series. In this episode, Ed has returned to the W line to document trains on the world-famous Saluda Grade. On the morning of March 21st, 1992, Ed was trackside in Sigsbee, South Carolina, where he intercepted this excursion train bound for Asheville. Privately funded by Jim Fetro, it was the first excursion to crest Saluda since July of 1972. The train of 4 coaches and a scrap gondola was pulled by a single GE C39-8, NS 8651. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Southern and later Norfolk Southern turned down numerous requests from groups wanting to operate passenger trains over the steepest mainline grade in the United States. By the spring of '92, it seemed that the Class I railroad had a change of heart. Ed was able to catch the odd-looking excursion at several locations before hiking down Saluda to record this scene near Sandcut. Spanning 2.7 miles from the bottom of the grade at Melrose to the crest at Pace's Crossing in Saluda, the Mountain of Challenge averages an estimated gradient of 4.7%, peaking at 5.1%, while gaining an elevation of 606 feet. Without a doubt, no other main line in North America was as challenging to operate as Saluda Grade. At the top of the grade, a large crowd had gathered to greet the train. While in town, the train performed several run-bys. The engineer that day was Frank Ramsey, who was joined by trainmen B.J. Taylor and Jim Harrison. Road foreman Ron Owenby oversaw the train's movements up and over Saluda, ensuring the safety of the passengers. After stopping in Saluda for photo ops, the train continued railroad west towards Asheville. West of town, Ed caught the train winding through this sweeping S-curve. At Tuxedo, the train rolled through an impressive rock cut. Not far from here is where the present-day stretch of abandoned track begins running south between Flat Rock and Landrum. At the Asheville suburb of Buena Vista, Southern Railway installed signs along the right-of-way which read, "Have a safe trip on the safest Carolina territory, the A&S." They stood for many years as a reminder of the outstanding safety record of the crews operating trains over the W line. In Asheville, the train stopped at West Yard where passengers unboarded for a layover. The excursion was a precursor to N&W 611's triumphant climb over Saluda that October, and essentially paved the way to convincing Norfolk Southern that the steam excursions could be operated over Saluda safely. Overall, it was a massive success and left a lasting impression on all those who rode and chased the train over Saluda Mountain. The next day, Painter returned to the mighty grade where he caught the Hayne Turn descending at Melrose. At the time, the train ran as symbol NS378 and originated in Asheville. Its primary purpose was to transfer local traffic between Asheville's West Yard and Spartanburg's Hayne Yard. In addition to general merchandise, the train hauled wood chips out of Hayne up the grade for delivery to Champion Paper in Canton, North Carolina. On board the trio of SD40 series locomotives was engineer Marshall Phoenix, joined by B.J. Taylor and Jim Harrison, who were trainmen on the previous day's excursion. Throughout the 90s, Ed got to know the W-Line crews well, and even got to ride up and down the grade several times before it was rail-banked in 2001. As it continued to Spartanburg, Ed caught the eastbound freight at speed in the towns of Tryon, Landrum, and Gramling. In Gramling, the W line passed by an old-fashioned warehouse where local peaches were sorted and packaged. Although Georgia claims to be the peach state, South Carolina is actually the nation's leading producer of this tasty fruit. At Hayne Yard, Ed caught up with the SD40s as the crew was preparing to tie onto their outbound loads. Back in the early 90s, Hayne Yard was a busy place with traffic running in all directions. In Spartanburg, the W line crosses the Piedmont Division main line and also connects with nearby CSX lines. While waiting for the Hayne Turn to depart Asheville, Ed also saw southbound manifest train 459, which ran daily between North Carolina's Linwood Yard and Inman Yard in Atlanta, Georgia. The train was working the yard where it would set off and pick up cars for Atlanta. After recording train 459 blasting out of Spartanburg, Ed returned to Hayne Yard where he found train 377 ready to depart. It was uncommon to see automotive traffic on the W line, but every now and then Ed would see cars like these tacked on the rear of the Hayne Turn. Where they were headed was anyone's guess. If you happen to know, please let us know. Back in Gramling, Ed set up his camera and tripod to record the train as it ran westbound. The two aggregate hoppers at the front of the train were dropped off for a customer just up the line at Campobello, allowing Ed enough time to beat the train to Melrose. As 377 approached Melrose, the conductor hopped off the locomotives to cut the train in three. Due to the steepness of the grade and the heaviness of the loads, the Hayne Turn had to be hauled up in multiple sections. This process is known as tripling. The first cut on this date's train was only 8 cars long. Even with 9,000 horsepower, the trio had to run in notch 8 the entire trip up the grade. In downtown Saluda, Ed recorded the first section as it crested the grade at Pace's Crossing. A few weeks later, Painter returned to Saluda to document the Hayne Turn once again. Although he lived over an hour away in Central, Ed frequently visited Saluda to see a girlfriend who lived nearby. The two would often chase together whenever he was in town. After catching the turn at the original location of the Saluda depot, Ed walked down the grade a bit to record the train as it began its descent to Melrose. Upon setting the retainers, the engineer eased the train down the mountain of challenge. Since trains could not exceed 8 miles per hour during their descent, it was rather easy for Ed to get additional shots between Saluda and Melrose, like this one at the intermediate signal west of Sandcut. Diesel locomotives were introduced to Saluda in 1949 and, thanks to dynamic braking, runaways began to decline drastically. Although wrecks weren't totally eliminated, with a major incident in 1964 and the final wreck occurring in 1971. Until 2001, the entire W line was controlled by automatic block signals, but since the famous grade was rail-banked in 2001, the signals have been deactivated. We're happy to report that the intermediate signal at this location has been preserved and is on display at the Bulls Gap Railroad Museum in Tennessee. Once again, Ed caught up to the train at Melrose with safety runoff track number 2 visible to the left of the frame. A few miles down the line, he captured the train winding through Tryon, passing the Southern Railway depot as it continued eastbound and down. South of downtown Inman, the W line ducks under Asheville Highway, which was the location of Ed's next shot. Ed was able to get ahead of the train at Hayne Yard, recording in much better weather conditions than the previous visit. SD40-2 3271 was built in January of 1978 for the Southern Railway and was set up to run Longhood forward. In 1994, its snowplows were repainted yellow for a brief time in an effort to increase visibility at grade crossings. 3271 remains on Norfolk Southern's roster as of 2023, but was rebuilt with an Admiral cab in 2012. The locomotive sandwiched in the middle, SD40-3173, was built by EMD 7 years prior in April of '71. It was one of Southern's first SD40 series models and operated on Saluda frequently in the early 90s. Norfolk Southern retired the locomotive in the mid-2000s and it was eventually scrapped around 2008. SD40-2 3258 was also built in January of 1978 for the Southern Railway and was set up to run Longhood forward. The locomotive remains on NS's roster as of 2023 but was rebuilt with an Admiral cab in 2014. While the train crew worked the yard, Ed made time for a lunch date. Afterwards, he drove back to Melrose where he found the train ready to climb up the hill. Parking halfway up the grade, he walked down the right-of-way to milepost 34. This section of Saluda measures at 4.6% and provided Ed with a show of motive power that he'll never forget. The first cut up the hill was 13 cars long. After dropping off the first cut in Saluda, the locomotives returned light to pick up another section at Melrose. The train's second cut was comprised entirely of woodchip cars for Champion Paper. With the entire train now back together, Ed set up his camera and tripod along the shoreline of Lake Summit, just a few miles west of downtown Saluda. Lake Summit is a hydroelectric dammed reservoir covering 324 acres, making it the largest lake in Henderson County. It was created in 1920 when the Green River was dammed by the Blue Ridge Power Company. The following afternoon, Ed caught 377 battling Saluda under an overcast sky. The trio of EMDs were heard long before they were seen, with the roar of the 645 prime movers echoing off the mountainsides. Although Saluda didn't see nearly as many trains as other North Carolina main lines, the ritual of doubling and tripling the hill made for non-stop action. With this in mind, we've always wondered why Pentrex, our favorite railroad media company and inspiration, never covered daily operations over Saluda Grade, as it would have made for a great railfan video. Nonetheless, we're forever grateful to Ed Painter for allowing us to share these now historically significant VHS tapes with you. Near stopboard number 2, Ed recorded the locomotives returning to Melrose light, and later on with the second cut of cars in tow. Saluda Grade's stop boards helped train crews balance their loads for a safe descent to Melrose. This balance was crucial to prevent potential runaway trains on the steep east slope. A well-balanced train would remain stationary when brakes were released. At these stop boards, trainmen set the air brake retainers on each car, which were valves that kept the brake settings in place, even with increased brake line pressure. This allowed engineers to maintain air brakes while recharging the train line during the descent. Properly working retainers maintained brake settings, but brakes couldn't be released on the hill once applied. If a car appeared stationary, checking the retainer level could indicate brake issues. For longer trains with over 30 cars, there was an option to go further to the second stop board to achieve balance, but most engineers stopped at the first one. Additionally, a road foreman boarded the train at Saluda to oversee the steep descent. After a 1971 runaway incident, a new rule required using empty cars as extra brakes on the downhill trains, with at least 25% of the cars being empty, including wood chip cars and occasionally other types like coal hoppers, to enhance safety during these descents. We hope you enjoyed our second installment of Ed Painter's Saluda series and look forward to bringing you more classic railroad videos from his extensive collection in the near future. Thank you for watching Delay and Block Productions, and until next time, happy railroading!